Okay, let's see how you guys did. Swap test with somebody. Swap test with your partner over there, or whoever it is. Swap test, we're gonna see what kind of grade you made.
It seems like you gotta go way too deep into the throttle with a diesel, where you can do it.
Yeah, it feels different. Unless it's one of those 6 liters, and then it's just doing it in a monster.
I have very
I know. What were the vehicle sensors first used for?
Drive the speedometer. Cruise control.
Cruise control. When did electronic speedometers make their debut on Ford pickups?
92.
92. What was the most noticeable difference between the PCM speedometers on the older trucks and the redesigned speedometer on the 97 models?
They didn't have the liquid crystal.
Yeah, it was a liquid crystal odometer.
The 92 to 96.
The 92 did. I had it. Yeah. That was what that was right there. Did not have an FIBB. What does the 97 F-150 speedometer? Where does it get its vehicle speed signal?
Differential.
The 97 model? You sure? Huh? Tail housing on the transmission. What does it generally mean when the check engine lights illuminated and the overdrive light and gear selector are flashing? Diagnostic trouble code will affect both fuel emissions and transmission shift strategy. An inoperative electronic speedometer concern has been verified. There's no blown fuses. Scan tool data indicates no vehicle speed is present. Most sensible thing to do next is... No, you visually inspect the vehicle speed sensor for harness problems and damaged gears. You do what's easy first. Pulling the cluster out is a little harder than looking at the vehicle speed sensor. Look where the signal starts if that's the easiest place to get to, right? The vehicle speed sensor generates its signal in the form of what?
DC voltage.
AC voltage that increases the vehicle speed. Removing the instrument cluster requires a removal of the headlight switch. What do you need to take the headlight switch out of a 97 F-150? Pocket screwdriver.
I put 90 above and pocket screwdriver.
No, please, man up as you go. The cluster has been removed and the VSS circuit is being checked at the instrument cluster. How much DC voltage should be present on the gray-black VSS wire with the key on and the engine not running?
Gray black?
Yep. None. That shouldn't be anything there. Because it's coming from the sensor, and if the sensor ain't spinning, If an electronic component normalizes and starts working correctly after being disconnected and reconnected, Mechanic A says he can guarantee the problem will return. Mechanic B says the problem could reoccur, and if the part isn't replaced, the customer should be advised the part may fail again and need replacement. And Mechanic B was right on that one. If you made less than an 80 on that test, slap yourself. Okay, now then.
I couldn't grade John's out of 10.
That was a quick fly through of yesterday's test. But what we're looking at here is we're looking at real engine performance stuff. There we go. Right in there. So these right here are conversations that are being had by real mechanics. Right here, this guy's got an 066446 in with bank 1 misfire code, cylinders 1 and 3. Now think about what we're looking at here. This is engine performance stuff. And these are people talking about it. I also noticed bank 2 fuel trims were high, which was plus 12% at idle. We did plugs first, which seems to have cleared the misfires, but the bank 2 fuel trims are still crazy. They got rid of the misfires. I have the 12% idle and over 20% at 2500. As they notice, these fuel trims are getting wider. What goes on if you've got a vacuum leak? You'll see high fuel trims at idle, but whenever you get above idle, they typically normalize, right? Okay, so anyway, fuel pressure good, no intake leak shown with smoke test, injector waveforms all show good with pintle hump. VVT pitch show near 0 at idle and around 40 degrees at 2500. You'll have a jump chain or a phaser issue, right? So here are cam crank waveforms. This is what he actually pulled this waveform. Look at it a little closer there. This right here is what you basically are going to see. You're looking at the camshafts right here. He's looking at both of them. And then he's looking at your crank. There's your missing tooth on your crank. And he wants to know what people think about that. It's obvious that you cannot look at a waveform and tell if it's normal unless you have a good waveform to compare it to, right? Anybody that thinks they can just look at a waveform and say, I don't like that, without knowing how it's supposed to look. The smartest thing to do is check as many of them as you can. Here's the conversation. Did you already clear the keep alive memory and then drive it? Is it setting a lean code? They want to know, does the PCM see a problem? Clearing the keep alive memory and driving it. That's not just clearing the codes. that's basically dumping everything, clearing the people out of memory. There are some scan tools that'll have a PID for that, clear the people out of memory. And some of them basically will have, you can pull the battery cable off, be the same thing. There's actually, well, some of them will even call it battery disconnect. Like if you do that, it'll just dump everything from the memory. I cleared keyboard line drive and got a lean code for bank 2. What's bank 1 fuel trim? Definitely looks like a timing issue. Overlay banks 1 and 2, CMP and the CKP. And that's basically, putting them together. Idle, bank 1, 6%, bank 2, 12.5%. 2,500 RPM, bank 1, 6%, bank 2, 20 to 25. See, on bank 2, it's increasing when he increases the speed. See what I'm saying? All right. And I'm just putting the initials of the guys that were doing the talking on this. And this is not anything that's public domain. This is a part of a closed group, that I'm talking to. This is not IATN, it's something else entirely. I'd be looking at the timing chain, maybe off a tooth, just not enough to set a diagnostic trouble code. Just a little bit off, right? EG said, I was suspecting that, but when my scope capture looks like both cams are lined up almost perfectly, I suppose it could be off at the crank. Is it possible the cam phasers are stuck? Wouldn't that show on the scope? And this guy right here says, opposing trims from bank to bank can be an indicator of timing issues, so is it adding fuel on the other bank? Well, one time years ago, when Donnie was over at Ford Place, somebody got the heads off of this vehicle, and they put it back together. I don't know, you may have seen it one of the engine where it had a misfire on one particular cylinder, and what he found out was that somebody had, water had gone in there, and the piston had topped out on water, and it had bent the rod a little bit. And basically the piston was, whenever you barred the engine over with the heads off, the piston was 1/4 of an inch lower when he hit its top dead center because the rod was bent. Except it was running just fine, but the PCM picked up on the misfire detection a little bit of enough of a loss, like a 40 RPM loss on that cylinder consistently enough that it was throwing misfire codes for that cylinder, even though you couldn't feel them. Got that? All right, so they got all that one all put back together. Obviously, when you pull the heads off, you got to take your time and change loose and all that kind of stuff. When you got it all put back together, this thing would really, really fly. It ran better than it ever did, but the fuel trims were plus and minus 10 from bank to bank. You know what I mean? One was plus 10, one was minus 10. I don't remember which one was which. And he said when they took it back apart, they found out that one camshaft was 1 tooth out. And it was causing the fuel trims to be like that. See, that's like on the car you're driving, I think. You got a 4.6 in yours? Okay. All right, so EG only bank 2 is getting extra fuel. See, the other one is not getting extra fuel, only bank 2. You got oxygen sensors, are in each bank. Are the rear oxygen sensors confirming the fronts are working properly? You can look at the back ones if you've seen a lot of them, and you're used to comparing them and tell if the rear oxygen sensors are and it's going to do whatever it has to satisfy the rear ones. The rear ones can be, remember I told you how the rear ones can be fouled up and cause the fuel trims to go crazy? On that. He said, I forgot to mention that compression on bank 1's about 100 on all cylinders and bank 2's about 120. His compression's lower. Not that. Now, bank 2's adding fuel, right? But compression's higher on 2. What are you thinking? Bank 1's the one that's not adding fuel. Bank 2's got higher compression, but it's getting extra fuel. So what's going to make it have higher compression and need extra fuel? That's really, you could be this guy one day. Think about it. All right. 100 PSI cranking? No way. This guy said, yep, that's cranking. I didn't even check specs on that. What are you thinking? See, I don't like those compression readings either. It ought to be a lot better than that. The whole thing seems low to me. Well, that is way low. 100 PSI is my bottom limit. I like to see 120 minimum. Should see up about 160, 175. Another reason I'm suspecting either timing chain jump or phaser stuff. Finally doesn't seem to have a lack of power. Seems like it runs just fine. He's just seeing fuel trims he doesn't like. Does this thing have any individual upstream catalytic converters, and it does check back pressure in each? And he said, I did that, there's no back pressure. He's already checked for back pressure to see if his catalysts were stopped up. I prefer to watch upstream HO2S and SFT while spraying carburetor clean or propane to check for intake leak. So sometimes the rubber gaskets will swell when you do a smoke test. Like if there's pressure in the intake and you're trying to push it out, the intake gaskets will push out and stop up the leak because of the mild positive pressure, or sometimes they'll swell up. All right, so I did that as well, didn't see any changes in the upstream sensors or fuel trims. So what you do is watch your fuel trims, hit it with a carburetor spray, and while you're watching the fuel trims, you see the fuel trims begin to correct really fast, you know you found your leak. What he's talking about doing. All right, if you can get a pressure transducer in a plug hole, you can check valve timing. See, it's a bunch of guys that are trying to help this guy figure out his problem. They're intrigued by it. They're trying to track it all down. The plus trim should be higher at idle than higher revs for a vacuum leak. So if you got a higher fuel trim and a low, and whenever it's running slower, and you don't, and it doesn't level out when you're going up higher, then there's something else going on inside the vacuum leak anyway. If on one bank a relative compression test will tell, so will a vacuum transducer in the intake with the throttle sealed. You reckon peak compression tester will be lower with the valve timing off? The timing would be massively off before you saw it, and peak pressure drop cylinder would confirm. Now, you remember I told you if your timing on the cylinder, is advanced a little bit, it can make the compression higher. You know what I mean? If the valve timing is advanced a little bit, the compression can be higher. You know, and it's like if it's even just a tooth off, sometimes that'll cause that. And then what it does is it basically is when if the valve is actually, let's see, how is that working? It would basically cause low pressure in the cylinder. It would start trying to pull it in there. Maybe that was a tooth off, excuse me, a tooth late. That would cause it, because the intake valve's not open yet, but the cylinder's already started going down. So what does that do? It's creating vacuum in that cylinder because the valve hadn't opened yet, and it's pulling oil up there and doing a wet test on the rings. See, all the time. See what I'm saying? The dynamics in that are pretty interesting. You reckon peak compression pressure will be lower with the valve timing off long life? One bank, yes, at least it'll be a good scope. See, these people are talking about that. I was more referring to the relative compression. I really thought it wouldn't show in the starter current, as the peak pressure would be very similar, and so on and so forth. That's an ongoing conversation. All right, so this kind of gives you the idea of how these guys think. You know what I mean? They're thinking back and forth. This one here is another one. We put a used engine in a vehicle that was supplied by a warranty company due to a blown head gasket. Came in the next day after having the engine installed with a P0301. Picture one is I got the pictures coming up here. Picture one is the coil that came out of cylinder one. I also found the PCM was not trying to control the coil after replacing the coil up there, the check engine light. Replace the PCM. This is what its coil looked like. You look for this, right? You want me looking for it? See it busted up coil. Vehicle ran good initially in the shop after PCM replacement. Came right back after getting on the highway with the same problem. Picture two is the second coil we installed on cylinder number one. What could cause the coils to do this? He put another coil in there and it busted that one too. That's troubling, isn't it? Right? So, what do you think about that? New or used PCM or used coil? New PCM, first coil was original to replacement engine. Second coil came out of old engine. Whoever original coil came apart, however, I think the PCM was replaced and the second coil came apart. These are notoriously bad about coil drivers getting stuck on ground and toasting coils. I've never been sure what was the chicken and what was the egg, but there is a TSB saying replace the PCM with an updated part and change all the coils with new possible coil drive wire shorted ground. Coil drive wire will be the one that tells the coil to fire. Shorts to ground, overheats the coil, poof. See where it was? All right, check wiring to the coil and plug it both in and see if it can light a headlight. Light a headlight. Remember I told you about using a headlight to see if it would? At this point, if wires are good, I'd do all OE only, no 40 copays. Wonder how many amps a PCM driver blows at. Possibly put a fuse in line as a safety measure. Just thought never done before. But 2 PCM get expensive. Check number one spark plug and open and secondary creates excessive heat in the coil sensors. Nowhere for the high voltage to go. That's a good deal. And he said, I saw this exact scenario on a 3.5 edge, replaced spark plug, coil, and PCM, fixed and delivered that one. Ford put out a bulletin on that one. So you must replace all the coils at the same time when you replace the PCM. See, this is, they're coming down to, the TSB said there was an issue with this. And this one guy said, I've seen a few Nissan Quests with bad main engine ground melting coils. And this right here is where you got PCM. You take this little website here, and you can send off your Ford Black Oak PCMs, and they'll rebuild them for you. It's not a bad price, really, especially since they're $800–900, or more. So don't forget to double check the spark plug part numbers. Escapes has burned us more than once. This is people from all over the country talking to each other about, mechanic problems. All right, next conversation. RW, the first step to searching for a dead miss. Now, what are you looking at on that screen there? That's his first step. That's the first thing he does. If he's got a dead miss, this is the first pattern he gathers. So what kind of connection is that?
You got a dead skip, that's the first thing you got.
That's the first thing he does if he's got a dead skip. This is the first thing he does. He takes his scope and he hooks it up and he gets this pattern. And this guy, one guy says, I'm assuming the large jump at the beginning is the issue. I'm just now getting my hands on scoping. His guys didn't start it. He's trying to get into this thing right here. What this guy's doing is he's taking the big current clamp, like I've got out here, hooking it up to his Pico. He puts it on the starter. You know, he disabled it, so he's just spinning it over, and all he's looking at is starter correct. Like that. And if he has one that's got low compression, he'll pick it up there. Now the first one is your initial grunt to get the starter going. You know, like when you start to push a car, it's easier to keep it rolling than it is to start it rolling because of inertia. All right, the same thing happens with this. All right, so this was taken with a high amp clamp off the battery terminal. You also do this with voltage, but it's been a while since I did it. Maybe someone here can elaborate. You got to be doing it with a scope, so you can't do it with anything else and expect to get anything. A low compression issue cannot be missed using this method. It really makes a difference. So it doesn't hardly take any compression at all to do that. All right, BM says, I thought you were checking all of your coils with a clamp and the high spikes. This guy was overthinking it. All this guy's doing is checking to see how hard it is to turn the engine over. You remember what I told you? You can listen to one spin and tell if you got low compression on one cylinder. Because when that one cylinder ain't squeezing anything, it doesn't take hardly any air. All right, so much to learn. Okay, the initial hit of the starter to get the engine turning takes 4 amps, and turning it by pushing a car, so on and so forth. And he said, man, I must be getting old. Search my name and relative compression and you'll get a few posts. I miss puberty. This guy's probably in his 20s, you know. And then so throwing this up here. Yellow is a voltage display, a relative compression, and green is a qualifier. He posted the settings of compression set. But see this one here? See that dip? See, it don't look like it all the way across. And that one right there should be another hump there. But there's no compression because that's amperage. There's not much amperage it takes to squeeze that air on that cylinder. All right. And this knothead right here says must be nice to be paid by the hour. Flaters just do a coil swap. What, for low compression? Come on, man. Well, this guy right here got annoying enough to where the administrator of that site got rid of him. Boot, get out. You know, kicked him off the page. Well, this guy says, I own the shop and get paid by the job. Unfortunately, we normally have more hours than allotted. This guy is fastidious about finding out what's wrong. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. He's going to make sure. This other guy says, when I was flat rate, I took the time to diagnose things properly and came out way ahead of just swapping parts, right? So when you take screenshots of good and bad waveforms like this, it builds confidence even if they don't have any clue as what they're looking at. You take it out to your customer and you say, this is the waveform before we did the repair and this is what it looked like afterwards and here's the difference. And even if they don't know what they're looking like, they say, wow, this guy right here is like a doctor. You know, he is looking at the right stuff. So, all right, that's the difference between diagnosis and changing parts. Diagnosis at first generally takes less time and results in fewer comebacks. The last thing you want is somebody coming back saying, it's just like it was, it's just like it was. You don't want that. You want to make sure it's fixed. All right, next conversation. This is a cool little thing here. This guy says, whenever you're ready to act up, Mr. Jeep 4.0, I'm ready. CKP and CMP codes has new parts installed from another shop. Time will tell. And this guy says, hey, use an old Sunscope card. Likey. You know, I like you. This guy said, no, this is an old PC card I bought for $10 at an auction. And so he put a great big TV in there and he hooked his picoscope up to it. And furthermore, he got a boom. I've been going to do this for a long time. He fixed the boom up on that thing so that whenever he rolls it up in the car, he can swing that boom over there and hook it up. And it's, you know, how we have to drag the cables up there. And that's just really smart. The SPDS machine used to be set up that way. And he actually has BNC connectors right here, which is the ones you got to push in and turn to lock, you know, shield it and all that stuff. And he put him a box up there. This guy right here is quite an innovator. And that's it. Look at what his shop looks like. See how clean it is? And I guarantee you he doesn't have tools laying over wearing greasy stuff all over the floor. You know? All right. So, how is your setup on that coil pack for the 4.0? I can see cam, crank, injector, and coil. I'm striving for training the eye, and I appreciate you posting it. Got to get my setup down pat. That's where I lose time. This right here is the crank. So that's 4.0. This is the cam. Now I can look at this cam and tell him it's not the cam phaser out of adjustment, because this is supposed to be coming right up in the middle of these four towers. If you zoomed out on it, you'd see this was split in the middle. So he doesn't have an out of adjustment cam. I was looking for that right there. There's your coil primary current, and there's your secondary. And your primary, you know, with the ignition line is what he's doing that with. And he's got it laying on there, primary current on that. All right, and so that's pretty much what you're going to be seeing there. See, whenever this thing, when the points close, it starts to saturate the coil, and then whenever the coil fires, you know, it snaps back down and starts over again. That coil primary code, that's why he's scoping that. Coil shorts to ground when misted with water. That should tell you something there. Well, this guy says, look at the main sensor ground on the passenger side of the block on a stud just above the oil filter housing area. There's a couple of different ones of those. They're notorious to be dirty and loose, causing random shutdown with codes ranging from O2 heater circuits, camel crank to ASD to a whole lot of other, ASD being automatic shutdown relay, you know. The harness that wraps around the back of the head comes loose and rubs through too, and safety neutral switch gives problems also. I had one kick his fanny and all that. I've had that before, a safety neutral switch on one of them things. If it's like the ones I'm thinking about, it's like $175 too. All right, this one more. You gotta love the scope. The detail you can capture is awesome. Now, have you seen one that looks like that? That's a VW Passat with a misfired idle. This is a diesel, electronic diesel, and he's basically getting that. All right, do you see anything any different about any one of those patterns? The one on the right looks different, doesn't it? You know. All right, the positive voltage is the piezo crystals opening the injector, and the negative voltage is the ECU shutting down the injector. See that? So it actually opens the injector and then it shuts it down, and you can see it going up. And this one guy says, I've seen a garage disconnect a piezo injector while running to trace a misfire, and it blew a hole in the top of the piston because the injector stayed open when he unplugged it. It doesn't, you know, see where I'm going with that? It must stay open. He's the only reason he can come up with that was if it stayed open when he unplugged it. I was working on a diesel Volkswagen one time, back in years ago, back in the early 80s, and I had a can of gasoline